The subcommittee will come to order. I would like to welcome Administrator Leonhardt and thank her for testifying before the subcommittee this morning. We all appreciate the DEA's efforts and great strides it has made to combat the increasingly dangerous drug trade. The Administrator's testimony comes at a timely moment as the war on drugs approaches a potential crossroads. On July 1st, Mexico will elect a new president. By all accounts, Enrique Peña Nieto of the Institutional Revolutionary Party is leading the field. The PRI government has governed Mexico for 71 years until 2000. While in power, the PRI minimized violence by turning a blind eye to the cartels. The current president, Felipe Calderón, has changed that strategy and aggressively confronted organized crime. As mentioned in your testimony, the key to the DEA's success along the southwest border is our relationship with the government of Mexico. You have characterized that relationship as at an all-time high, but are worried that our relationship could be at a high water mark with the impending change in the office of president. Mr. Nieto does not emphasize stopping drug shipments or capturing kingpins. He recently told the New York Times that while Mexico would continue to work with the United States, it should, quote, should not subordinate to the strategies of other countries. He further emphasized that his priority would be a reduction in violence, not a dismantling of criminal organizations. By all accounts, this sounds like a reversion to the pre-policies of old. We, of course, have no vote in the upcoming Mexican election, and our only hope for the outcome is that it is free and fair. But we do have a deep-seated interest in minimizing drug trafficking and organized crime south of the border. I believe that these goals are also in Mexico's long-term interest, and I urge you to press this truth with the incoming Mexican president and his administration, regardless of who it is. I would also like to raise a few troubling incidents within the DEA. The DEA has long been a model in the law enforcement community, but today this subcommittee will need answers about a few recent incidents that are both troubling and unacceptable. If not addressed swiftly and effectively, I fear these events will become a stain on the DEA's reputation and ultimately undermine its law enforcement mission. The Secret Service has been the focal point of the Cartagena prostitution scandal, but I understand that at least 3 DEA agents also hired prostitutes during the preparation for the president's visit to Colombia. I further understand that this was not an isolated event for the DEA. The Secret Service has moved quickly to address the scandal and has already removed 8 of the 12 employees who have been implicated in this incident from their jobs. Another is in the process of losing his security clearance. To my knowledge, the DEA has not taken similar action. Similarly, while the ATF was a major factor in Fast and Furious, the DEA was also involved. Tony Colson, the DEA's agent in charge of southern Arizona during Fast and Furious, said that many DEA field agents knew that ATF was walking guns to Mexico, but supervisors told the agents to back off when they objected. Mr. Colson was among the first senior public officials to admit knowing about this botched operation. He claims he raised objections to then DEA Chief Elizabeth Kempschall and was told it was taken care of. After attending a meeting with the ATF agent in charge, Bill Newell, Colson said he knew Fast and Furious was not some sort of benign pie-in-the-sky publicity stunt. Guns were actually getting in the hands of criminals, close quotes. As with the Colombian prostitution incidents, I am not aware of any investigation or discipline from within the DEA. Most recently, this last April, a DEA office in San Diego literally forgot about a 23-year-old in a holding cell. DEA agents arrested Daniel Chong during a raid on a party in the San Diego area where there were illegal drugs. After questioning him, the agents apparently told Mr. Chong that he would not be charged before they placed him back into a holding cell. The agents then forgot he was there. Mr. Chong remained locked in the holding cell for 5 days with no access to food, water, or a toilet. He said he heard voices and yelled for help, but no one heard him. After 48 hours, he started hallucinating and to survive drank his own urine. At some point during this neglect, he broke his glasses and attempted to kill himself. It goes without saying that this incident is extremely unacceptable, and I look forward to hearing what steps the DEA is taking to address each of the incidents discussed and to ensure that nothing similar happens in the future. I hope that these events are anomalies in the DEA's record and not an indication of things to come. And I now yield to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to join you in convening this oversight hearing on our nation's drug enforcement agency, and I want to thank Director Leonard for years of dedicated service and for appearing before us today. I'm also mindful that there are thousands of dedicated DEA employees who enforce our drug laws and directives every day, many of whom are putting their lives on the line to do so. Therefore, I consider it our responsibility in supporting and directing their efforts to ensure that their dedication and sacrifices are put to the most effective as well as productive use. The DEA is involved in drug enforcement activities all over the world. However, it is not clear that all of these activities are as effective or important as others in stopping or reducing the scourge of drug abuse. In general, there are supply-side strategies and demand-side strategies to reduce drug abuse. Research indicates that demand reduction through prevention, education, and treatment is much more effective than supply reduction through interdiction and law enforcement efforts. One study showed that the cost of reducing cocaine consumption in the United States by 1%, reducing cocaine consumption in the United States by 1%, the cost is $783 million for source country control, $366 million for general interdiction activities, about $250 million for domestic law enforcement, or only $34 million for treatment of heavy users. Thus, the least costly supply control, that's domestic law enforcement, costs over 7 times as much as treatment to achieve the same consumption reduction. Another study showed that drug treatment saved an average of $7 in later prison and medical costs for every dollar spent on treatment. And one of the big problems we have in this country with illegal drugs, as well as with illegal prescriptive drugs, is that there is a huge demand. The history on the war on drugs shows us that there is a demand. When there is a demand for the product, suppliers will find a way to provide it, no matter what the cost. History also shows that no matter how many tons of drugs we interdict or capture, it represents only a small fraction of drugs being trafficked. And therefore, the evidence suggests that our efforts to reduce drug abuse have intensified. While the evidence suggests that our efforts to reduce drug abuse have intensified in this country, the street price for some of the most dangerous drugs has actually gone down, while the quality has gone up, and drug use has increased or stayed the same during that time. Other evidence suggests that the massive drug enforcement effort in this country has resulted in legions of users and street-level dealers being in prison for long periods of time with huge strains on state and local budgets with no discernible impact on the drug trade. Still, other evidence suggests that while drug use in all major abuse categories among white Americans is as high or higher than drug use among Black and Hispanic Americans, a vast majority of those imprisoned for drug law violations are Black and Hispanic. For example, drug use data indicates that some 60% of crack cocaine users are white, while 94% of those imprisoned for crack are Black. Black Americans make up about 12% of the population, but almost 50% of those incarcerated for illegal drugs. Moreover, drug penalties are so draconian that many are serving life sentences or the equivalent in years, even for first-time offenders, and mandatory minimum sentencing are a major contributing factor to this situation. When we consider the unfairness of so much of the burden of drug abuse being heaped upon African Americans, the harshness of drug sentences, and the life consequences for drug convictions, such as loss in voting rights and subjection to employment discrimination, drastically lower employment prospects, we can see while Michelle Alexander considers the war on drugs to have ushered in a new era of Jim Crow, as she outlined in her book, The New Jim Crow: Mass Incarceration. And when we consider the effectiveness of and the much higher cost of punitive supply reduction strategies compared to many times more effective and much cheaper demand reduction strategies, such as treatment, it's not hard to wonder whether there is a motive beyond drug abuse reduction in our strategy choices. Recently, I saw a news article of young drug offenders in their 20s in Virginia, two of whom got sentences of 50 and 35 years respectively. No one seemed concerned about the average cost at $30,000 a year, that this represented $2.5 million to warehouse the drug abusers. And I was left to wonder whether or not that $2.5 million should have been, but some of that should have been spent on Boys and Girls Clubs where they were cutting spending in that same area. So, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to hearing the Director's views on public policy implications of our agency's operations with respect to these grave concerns. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The Chairman Emeritus, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Sensenbrenner. My first comment is to congratulate Ranking Member Bobby Scott on an excellent opening statement that tracks much of what I've been doing in preparing for this. I think the beginning of this discussion on the part of the Subcommittee on Crime can be one of the most important contributions that the House Judiciary Committee can make on the subject of the American criminal justice system. But before I go any further, Chairman Sensenbrenner, I noted 14 issues that you raised with our distinguished witness, and I stopped counting after that. The question that I have, sir, is are we going to have an additional hearing to give her an opportunity to respond to each and every one of those
Gentlemen,
statements? With pleasure.
That depends upon how responsive she is to the issues that I've raised. I think we all would like to get this wrapped up in one hearing, including Ms. Leonard.
Well, it was, thank you, sir. It was my impression that we could devote the rest of the next couple hours to a discussion between you and her about what you raised in your opening statement. So I don't understand with a 2, 4,
Well, gentlemen, you
5,
again.
6. Yes, sir.
The chair knows from years and years that the current chair enforces the 5-minute rule on himself as well as on everybody else.
Well, that's what makes it more difficult. I mean, that's the problem that I'm raising. With 6 members here and probably more to come under the 5-minute rule, there's no way she can ever get to any kind of cogent response to the issues that were raised, some of which are very serious. So I leave that for us to discuss further as we go on. I'm very interested in this subject because I started off my career on the Subcommittee on Crime when I first was able to get on the House Judiciary Committee. And this subject that about drugs is extremely critical, and I'm looking forward to a discussion. And I have no problem with holding another hearing or as many hearings as necessary. We don't get any brownie points for having one hearing and no more. The question is how deeply and thoroughly and accurately do we go into these very important social and criminal justice questions. And so I would say to my colleagues and to our distinguished witness that the cost of the war on drugs is more than $1 trillion to date, astronomical, and yet the same proportion of drug usage, illegal drug usage, continues at the same rate. And what I'm looking for, in addition to the distinguished witness giving us a review of what goes on at DEA and what you're doing about it, is what kind of changes or what kind of creative, even imaginative ideas that can we come up with to really do something about this. It seems to me that there are policies that might actually reduce consumption that may not have been tried yet, and I'm hopeful that we can examine that. Another issue that we may or may not get to today.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Can I finish this sentence?
Certainly, without objection.
It's important to figure out how we can minimize this criminalization and punishment concept by replacing it with health and treatment services. I mean, if this is only lock them up and throw away the key, it doesn't, I don't think, shed much information or light or work in a substantively important way that this hearing this morning could bring to this subject. And I thank the chairman for the additional time.
Without objection, all members' opening statements will appear in the record. Before introducing Ms. Lenhart, I'm going to get into a lock them up and throw away the key and decide not to charge them situation during the question and answer, so maybe that will address some of your concerns. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's witness. Michelle Lenhart was unanimously confirmed as the administrator of the Drug Enforcement Administration in December. She had been acting administrator since November of 2007 and served as the DEA's deputy administrator since 2004. Prior to becoming DEA administrator and deputy administrator, she held several positions within DEA's senior executive service. She was the special agent in charge of the DEA's Los Angeles Field Division from 1998 through 2003. She previously held the position of special agent in charge of the DEA's San Francisco Field Division in 1997 and 1998. As a career DEA special agent, Ms. Lenhart held several key positions as she moved through the ranks of the DEA. In 1995, she was promoted to the position of Assistant Special Agent in charge of the LA Field Division. Between 93 and 95, she held management positions within DEA headquarters to include Career Board Executive Secretary, Office of Professional Responsibility Inspector, and Staff Coordinator in the Operation Division. She has been more than 30 years in law enforcement, beginning her career as a Baltimore City police officer after graduating from college in Minnesota with a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice in 1978. Without objection, Ms. Lenhart, your witness statement will be entered into the record in its entirety. I ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes, and you know all about the green, yellow, and red lights in front of you. Ms. Lenhart.
Thank you. Chairman Sensenbrenner, Ranking Member Scott,
Could you please pull the microphone a little bit closer to you?
Chairman Sensenbrenner, Ranking Member Scott, and members of the subcommittee, it is my honor to appear before you to discuss your oversight of the DEA and our role in reducing crime, protecting the American public from drugs, and increasing our nation's security. Before highlighting DEA's programs and recent accomplishments, I want to first thank you for your continued support of our essential law enforcement mission. Your partnership is especially appreciated in light of the ever-changing challenges we face. Today, a hallmark of our many drug trafficking organizations is the increasingly global nature of their operations. Traffickers are using the latest technology to conduct their daily business, from sophisticated communication devices and services to laundering money through electronic value transfers. And they use innovative transportation methods, moving drugs in everything from planes to tunnels, from wooden canoes to fully submersible submarines. And we cannot let up, or we will never catch up. DEA and our partners are successfully disrupting, dismantling, and destroying major drug trafficking networks. Our enforcement actions are reducing the availability of drugs and the harm they cause, and our efforts are integral to our nation's comprehensive drug control strategy. One of the highest priorities for DEA today is stopping the diversion of prescription drugs and precursor chemicals from legitimate use. Today, more people abuse prescription drugs than those that abuse heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine combined. In response, the DEA has dedicated more agents to investigate criminal prosecution of prescription drug diversion than ever before, and our regulatory arm is dedicated to ensuring compliance with the law for those who manufacture, distribute, prescribe, or sell controlled substances. We have also helped the public help us reduce the supply of prescription drugs through our national prescription drug take-back events. With assistance from more than 3,000 law enforcement partners in all 50 states, our 4 take-back days have collected almost 800 tons of prescription medication that would have languished in medicine cabinets where they could have been diverted. Soon, we will be implementing the Secure and Responsible Drug Disposal Act, which you passed into law. Through this act, DEA will be providing the nation with a permanent solution to the problem of proper prescription drug disposal. DEA is also at the forefront of another emerging trend, synthetic drugs, and I want to thank you for the committee's leadership in scheduling 26 substances used in products like K2 and Spice, which will help us control and prevent these dangerous drugs from doing more damage. Unlike controlled prescription drug diversion, which is principally a domestic drug challenge, the majority of the organizations responsible for other drug threats operate internationally. The most immediate of these threats comes from Mexico-based criminal organizations and drug cartels. They are responsible for the vast majority of violence there and increasingly in many countries, including Central America. In our operations there and elsewhere, DEA relies on our close ties with our brave international partners, and these relationships extend beyond on-the-ground operations and involve training and intelligence and resource sharing. DEA has close, deep ties with Mexico, relationships that will have an impact in turning what is a threat to their national security and rule of law into a law enforcement challenge. Indeed, our cooperation with the government of Mexico is at an all-time high. In addition to training, operational, and intelligence bonds, DEA and the Department of Justice has a judicial partnership with the government of Mexico that has resulted in nearly 250 extraditions since 2010. And this includes high-ranking members from all the Mexico-based cartels, such as Jose Antonio Acosta Hernandez, who was sentenced to life in federal prison in April after admitting his role in 1,500 murders since 2008, including the triple homicide of a U.S. consulate employee and 2 consulate workers' family members. We share Mexico's responsibility and commitment to confront, fight, and defeat these polydrug trafficking organizations and take away the drugs, money, power, and freedom of their leaders. DEA is also working with the government of Afghanistan to counter the drug trafficking threat there. For example, just last week, Haji Bachko, a notorious Afghan drug trafficker with ties to the Taliban, was sentenced to life in prison on narcoterrorism charges in the U.S. His heroin was traced to 20 countries in 1 year. It's estimated that he supplied about 20% of the world's heroin supply. Thanks to the work of extraordinary DEA law enforcement personnel supported by you, he will never be free. I have great confidence that DEA, with your support, will continue to meet and overcome these challenges and those that lie ahead. And they're not insignificant, from the growing list of designer synthetic drugs to the reemergence of methamphetamine, from the increasing presence of drug traffickers in West Africa to the emerging financial and communication tools being used by criminal organizations, and so many more. We have our work cut out for us. But just because the mission is difficult does not mean we should give up or surrender. And some argue that legalization and regulation, even at the cost of untold human suffering and misery, would strip the traffickers of their enormous profits. Both common sense and history have taught us that those who are displaced from the drug trade migrate into other areas of criminality. And we have a responsibility in a nation of laws to enforce the law. And I've devoted my life to this duty, and all the people at DEA are committed to this goal and to this fight, a fight in which, with your support, we shall prevail. And thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. And I ask that my written statement be added to the record.
Without objection.
Taking your question.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ms. Lenhart, for a very comprehensive statement. Let me use my 5 minutes to try to pack in as much as I can. First, let's get to the issue of Daniel Chong, who was the 23-year-old who apparently was forgotten in a holding cell in San Diego after a decision was made not to charge him. Has anybody been disciplined as a result of this?
Well, thank you for asking about that, that incident, Mr. Chairman. I'm deeply troubled by the incident. DEA is deeply troubled by the incident. The incident was a mistake. It wasn't malicious, and it wasn't intentional. And during our 39-year history as an agency, we're not aware that anything like that has ever happened. And like you, the entire agency was shocked by what happened. And no one's more shocked than the agents that were actually, and task force officers that were involved in the incident. Immediately upon learning about the incident, I ordered a review of our detention policies. We are currently fully cooperating with the Office of the Inspector General for Department of Justice, and they're conducting the investigation. But in the interim, I ordered the assessment. I felt compelled to send a management team from a neighboring field division, Los Angeles, down to review what had happened. And I've personally spoken with all 21 of our field division SACs. We've entered into discussion about how to make sure this doesn't happen anyplace else. We've put many different procedures in place already, and all 21 SACs have reviewed their policies and their procedures. They've initiated changes to ensure that this never happens again.
Okay, well, that's nice to know. Now, let's talk about Cartagena. The Secret Service has been very public in disciplining and, in fact, dismissing many of the agents who were involved in the prostitution scandal there. Have any of the DEA agents who were involved there been disciplined?
Well, let me say that this is, I'm extremely disappointed by the conduct allegations in Colombia. These allegations are not representative of the 10,000 men and women that work for the DEA. And they don't.
Well, I'll stipulate that, and you know, nor were the Secret Service agents who were involved in their end of this scandal indicative of the people who work for the Secret Service. You know, most of them are dedicated, but the Secret Service moved quickly. I have not noticed that the DEA has moved quickly at all to deal with this.
Well, I can assure you we moved immediately, very quickly. As soon as information was given to me by the director of the Secret Service, I brought the agents in question out of country and made them available to the OIG. Now, it's not being investigated by DEA because the OIG has taken on the investigation. We are cooperating with them and making everybody available, all witnesses, and are assisting them wherever possible. The action that I could take, however, was I curtailed their tours in Colombia. They are presently on limited duty. While the investigation is taking place, OIG is still completing interviews, so it's not really appropriate for me to prejudge the results, but I guarantee you that they will face, if there was misconduct, they will face our disciplinary process.
Now, have you investigated Mr. Colson's allegations relating to Fast and Furious? And if so, what's been the result there?
Well, I can tell you that that too is still under review by the OIG. We're all interested in resolution there so we can find out who knew what, when, and where. As far as Mr. Colson, you should know that we understand that he retracted his statements. And so we are waiting for the OIG review.
Now, was the part of the statement that Mr. Colson said, quote, guns were actually getting in the hands of criminals, unquote, part of what he retracted?
I believe he retracted all his statement. He said he was misquoted and retracted it. Beyond that,
well, I think we know that guns have been getting in the hands of criminals. So, well, let me say, Ms. Lenhart, I think your answers have been inadequate in all three. There's been no discipline. The OIG works at its own pace. The Secret Service did take very, very quick action when the scandal came to light. And I will accept the suggestion that the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Conyers, has made to have another hearing. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lenhart, Pew Research Center has estimated that any incarceration rate over 350 per 100,000 starts creating diminishing returns, and over 500 per 100,000 becomes actually counterproductive. You're adding to the crime rather than detracting from it. That's at 500 per 100,000. Our incarceration rate in the United States is over 700 and some per 100,000. And in minority communities in some states, it's as high as 4,000 per 100,000. What role does DEA policy play in over-incarceration and the racial disparity, and what is DEA doing about it?
Thank you, Ranking Member. I can tell you that the Drug Enforcement Administration, our mission is really to go after the world's biggest and baddest drug traffickers. We spend our resources, our work hours going after the largest drug traffickers, the sources of supply, the heads of organizations and the heads of drug cartels, the heads of trafficking organizations, transportation organizations, those that most impact the drug supply on the United States. For instance,
well, has the DEA, any DEA policy contributed to over-incarceration and the racial disparity?
Well, there are federal drug laws that DEA enforces. You as Congress, you set the laws, we enforce the federal laws. We go where our intelligence takes us. We go where the evidence takes us.
Well, what is the policy of the DEA on mandatory minimums? They've been studied and found to be discriminatory and ineffective in reducing crime. What is the DEA policy on mandatory minimums?
There is no policy for DEA on minimum mandatories. We go where the evidence is. If someone is trafficking drugs, we investigate that.
So
we investigate their organization.
You don't have a position supporting mandatory minimums as a crime-fighting tool since they've been found to be discriminatory and a waste of money and ineffective in reducing crime? You don't have a position on mandatory minimums?
We do our investigations, we conduct our operations without regard to the sentencing. But the Department of Justice was very...
Well, in terms of sentencing, when you're dealing with local, state, and federal task forces, there are allegations that some of the task force results have been referred to federal court and some are referred to state court. Federal court where you have the draconian mandatory minimums have been shown to have a discriminatory impact because all the crack cases get sent to federal court where you can get 5 years mandatory minimum, and meth cases tend to be tried in state court where they're not subject to those kinds of mandatory minimums. Is that DEA policy?
That is not DEA policy. Again, we bring our most significant cases to federal court. We bring the sources of supply and those responsible for the drug supply on the streets of the United States and much of the violence.
So that is not the policy. Are you aware of that allegation?
I'm aware, and the Department of Justice has taken a position on the fair sentencing and the recent change with crack versus powder. The department has been very supportive of that. Our role as investigators, though, is to investigate, follow the evidence, go after the most extreme traffickers, and that's what we do.
Are you aware of the study that showed that for about 30, you can reduce drug abuse by 1% with $35 million in treatment and $250 and up for law enforcement side? Are you familiar with that study? And if so, how does that affect the strategy of the DEA?
Well, I don't know if it's the same study. I am familiar with studies that show the savings, every dollar put into demand reduction, every dollar put into treatment. And that is why we're very supportive of the very balanced drug strategy that we currently have in the United States. The President's drug strategy is very clear that you need demand reduction, and prevention, you need
you're putting
treatment.
the same amount of resources in both?
I'm sorry, sir?
You're putting similar resources in both?
Well, actually, this past year, there was more money spent on prevention and treatment than there was on domestic law enforcement.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go back over a couple of things earlier on. The issue with the San Diego holding cell where the person was held, as you know, no need in rehashing at all. But I just have a question. I listened to your answer. What was your current policy at the time this happened?
The policies are different in the different field divisions because they have different, some don't even have a holding cell. But in San Diego, the standard policy is that anybody that is detained, and they're only detained in our field division for interviewing and processing, that the agents and task force officers in the group that brought that defendant in is responsible for him while he's there being processed and is responsible until he is either brought to jail or released. Since this incident, that San Diego Field Division moved very quickly to put in a divisional order and policies and procedures that actually spell out what everyone's duty is. And we shared that with the 20 other field divisions who have also put these in place.
So in other words, there was no one assigned to make sure that that holding cell, or whatever you want to call it, was empty at the end of the day so that no one was left behind.
It's unwritten that it's always a responsibility of the group supervisors, of the group responsible for the defendant.
That's a no then. It's not written down, so therefore they didn't follow that type of procedure because it's very apparent by what happened, which is, as a former law enforcement officer, I'm just so astounded and baffled by how this could happen. I know you have 226 domestic offices and 21 field divisions throughout the U.S. and 85 foreign offices in 65 countries. And they are all led by special agents in charge called SACs. 7 out of 21 DEA field divisions are leaderless and have been for several months and some for well over 1 year. These divisions include Boston, New York, Philadelphia, St. Louis, San Diego, Los Angeles, and the Caribbean. The New York Post reported in April that the New York SAC vacancy is having a significant impact on agent morale. Although there have been many, there's acting SACs in these divisions, they may or may not feel empowered to make the decisions needed or policy changes needed due to their acting status. You know, and again, I'm a former deputy sheriff, and knowing how important a stable chain of command is, knowing that your rank and file need to have the leadership, knowing that they need to have the direction, knowing that there should be policies and procedures in place, why are so many SAC positions vacant? And are you doing anything to fill these?
Thank you.
When will they be filled?
Thank you for asking the question. In filling SES vacancies, some are open for extended periods of time, but when a SAC leaves, retires, or is transferred, there is someone put in charge. It's only recently been that we've had a confirmed administrator, myself, who rose up through the ranks, and a confirmed deputy that causes this domino effect. And so as we move our chief of operations into the deputy position, now we are moving the pieces, we are putting people in place. All of the field divisions that have been vacant have had very, very strong and good leadership.
So you are working to fill them, because I have a lot more questions and I want to get my time in. I have a question. Was the impact of there being an acting SAC in San Diego an issue with what happened?
Not at all.
Okay. You said you have different policies for different areas. Wouldn't it be easier to set up a major streamlined policy for every one of your divisions to follow, and then those that have other things, like if you have a holding cell, you will make sure that before you close that office every day, that you go through that holding cell. 1, you sweep for people. 2, you sweep for any contraband. Before you, I would say that every time you put someone in, before you put them in, you make sure there's no contraband in, and every time you take them out, you do the exact same thing. But when you leave every day, there should not be anybody in there to be left behind. One other question I have before I run out of time is it still the policy of not allowing any of our agents that are working with Mexico, let's say, to be armed when across the border? And if so, why? Because as we know, we have lost one of our agents that did not and was not armed and was murdered. I just want to know if it is still the policy, are you still promoting that policy, or are you trying to change that policy so our men and women can protect themselves while on detail?
Having been a former law enforcement officer, you know that the safety of our agents is more important than anything. And I would say because of their safety, I would be glad to talk to you, not in this forum, to discuss those safety issues. And I'm hoping that you respect that, and I'd be glad to come and see you myself.
I look forward to
discuss.
I yield back.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers.
Thank you, Chairman Sensenbrenner. I feel, and I appreciate your announcing that there will be continued hearings about DEA and its role. You will note, Madam Director, that I originally pointed out in my remarks that we spend huge amounts of resources, and the rate of illegal drug activity continues at about the same pace. Have you been able to reflect on that in terms of how this keeps going on and what we might be able to do about it?
Thank you for the question, sir. I think there's a lot of misinformation and misperceptions about actually the drug situation, and especially when it comes to teens. So I do want to tell you that 650,000 fewer teenagers are using drugs today than a decade earlier, and that's a 15% decline. The balanced drug strategy that we have has played a role. Marijuana use by teens has dropped 7%. Methamphetamine has plummeted 67%. Ecstasy use has been slashed 42%, and cocaine use is down 40% since 2006. Meth has dropped even more, and that's 50% since 2006. So we do see these drops in teen drug use. We also see the same corresponding drops in adult drug use. So we are doing something correct with our drug strategy, and we believe that it's the three: the prevention, the treatment, the enforcement. You need all three, and that is one of the causes that we're seeing changes in drug use. Obviously, we're concerned with the uptick in prescription drugs, legal drugs, but we have been able to change the drug use. We've also been able to change availability of drugs on the streets, especially cocaine. And since 2006, since partnering with the Calderon administration in Mexico, we actually have had sustained increases in the price of cocaine, and we've seen the purity plummet.
Well, this goes contrary, your statement, which is, I'm happy to hear it. And of course, you know, you're coming back before us, so I'll have a chance to check what you're telling me against information that I have not validated yet. But the statement that bothered me here was that the drug addiction rates at currently 1.3% in this country are the same ratio as in 1971, and that we've spent over $1 trillion in appropriations fighting this war, and it's pretty stagnated. Are we just citing different pieces of information to support our positions, or is there some correctness in the citation that I just gave you?
The figures that I am using are from the Monitoring the Future study, which has been used to look at and to track trends in teen drug use. It also comes from the statistics from Quest on workplace drug testing. And if you're using the year 1971 and comparing it with this year, you have to remember that the highest rates of drug use, those years were 74, 75, and 76. They spiked significantly after 1971. It's undisputed that we actually are having the lowest rate of cocaine use in this country in 30 years.
All right,
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Gentleman from Puerto Rico.
Mr. Chairman, can I just point out that I want to continue this discussion outside of the hearing room between now and the next time we have the distinguished witness in.
Okay, statement will be in the record. The gentleman from Puerto Rico, Mr. Pierre Luisi.
Good morning, Administrator. Thank you again for meeting with me in February to go over the public safety crisis we're facing in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. You, as much as any other federal official, have an intimate understanding of how serious this problem is. The number of drug-related homicides in Puerto Rico in recent years would be considered a national emergency if it were occurring in any state. That's not just my opinion. That's what Senator Rubio also stated during a hearing in December. Since our meeting, there have been several important developments. First, the House approved a CJS appropriations bill that notes that federal efforts along the southwest border have affected trafficking routes and crime rates in the Caribbean, and that directs the Attorney General to address these trends by allocating the necessary resources to U.S. jurisdictions in the Caribbean and reporting back to Congress on the specific steps that have been taken. Second, about 2 weeks ago, Attorney General Holder was sitting where you are now. I asked him why it would not be appropriate for DOJ to increase the resources it devotes to Puerto Rico, even if it is only a temporary surge, just as the federal government did when there was a spike in violence on the U.S. side of the southwest border. I acknowledged current budget constraints, but said that this is a matter of prioritizing limited resources and making sure they're being allocated to the U.S. jurisdictions where the need is the greatest. The AG responded that DOJ is starting to embrace this surge concept, injecting agents and resources into what he called hotspots. That is, areas that have seen a rise in violent crime. The AG, the Attorney General, said that Puerto Rico would certainly be a candidate for such a surge because of the island's violent crime rate. I just hope that action follows those words. Third, the Homeland Security Committee just approved a bill today, basically saying that we should have a counter-narcotic strategy for the Caribbean border, just along the same lines as the ones we have for the southwest and the northern border areas. That's great. I've been fighting for that, and it's about to happen. ONDCP will be told to do this and to do it within 180 days from the time this appropriations bill becomes law. Now, your men and women in Puerto Rico are doing terrific work, Administrator. You know, several weeks ago, you had your agency led an operation that resulted in the arrest of dozens of airline workers in Puerto Rico who were smuggling drugs on flights to the mainland U.S. However, despite the recent staffing increases that you briefed me on when we met, I remain absolutely convinced that the DEA does not have enough agents in Puerto Rico. According to data provided to my office, there are nearly 3 times as many agents assigned to the Miami field office as there are to Puerto Rico, even though the island's population is 7.5 times greater than metropolitan Miami's, and our drug-related violence is off the charts. I want to be clear. I'm not saying Miami doesn't have significant problems that you need to deal with. I'm just providing this comparison because it brings into sharp, you realize how under-resourced Puerto Rico is when you see this stat. So I would like to hear your view in terms of what you can do or not in staffing our office in Puerto Rico and the VI.
Thank you, sir. We have met, and you know that the whole Caribbean region is of concern to the DEA. When we moved resources in 2002 from our other field divisions down to the southwest border, we left the Caribbean region alone because we knew if we were successful on the southwest border that we would start seeing impact in the Caribbean. So San Juan, the surrounding, that field division has been very important to us, and I actually have increased the resources there. And so let me talk about those increases. In 2009, there were 83 agents assigned to San Juan and Ponce. I increased it to 95. In fact, I've done what we can to make sure that agents graduating from the academy and senior agents rotating in from foreign offices are assigned there. We will continue to try to give as many resources to Puerto Rico as possible. On the surge, know before your discussion with the Attorney General about surges that DEA actually was surging in Puerto Rico a couple years back when you needed help with housing projects on the drug trafficking and the murder rate and the violence there. We responded by sending agents from MET teams around the country into Puerto Rico for periods of time to help with that. And we will continue, even though we no longer have the MET program. We will look for ways to assist our agents and our fellow law enforcement officers in Puerto Rico with additional resources.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Goodlatte.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Leonhardt, welcome. I wanted to ask you about reports that DEA field agents in southern Arizona were aware of the gun walking being done by ATF. Tony Colson, the DEA's agent in charge of southern Arizona during Fast and Furious, said that many DEA field agents knew that the ATF was walking guns to Mexico, but their supervisors told them to back off when they objected. Have you investigated who within the DEA knew what about Fast and Furious and why they did so little to stop gun walking to Mexico?
Thank you, sir. As I mentioned earlier, those statements, as I understand it from Mr. Colson, were actually recanted. He said he was misquoted, and he's recanted that. We are very excited, and we are waiting on these results from the OIG because prior to Mr. Colson's statements, we were not aware that that DEA was aware, DEA agents in Arizona were aware of the tactics that ATF was using. So the investigation is being done by OIG. That should answer, we've made all our people available. That should answer the question about who knew what for my agency. In the meantime,
did Mr. Colson explain why he would why he made the statements in the first place if he later recanted them?
I have not had any discussions with Mr. Colson. I just know that right after there was a reporting of what he had said, he called our headquarters to say he did not say those things and that he recanted his statements.
So he denied saying them. He didn't say them and then take them back. So what you were telling us?
I heard both. But hopefully the OIG is going to interview him.
So you're relying on the Office of the Inspector General to investigate his statements and whether or not it's true that agents working under him were aware of the fact that gun running was taking place. Because, in fact, we know it was taking place, so it's not all that surprising that some DEA agents might know what was going on with regard to ATF activities in the same region. But at the same time, our greater concern is why supervisors might have told the agents to, quote, back off when they raised concerns about the wisdom of sending guns to drug dealers and others in Mexico that ultimately resulted in the death of a Border Patrol agent. So you will report back to this committee once you hear from the OIG and let us know what actions have been taken to make sure that when people find out that wrongdoing is taking place, that they're freely able to report it to their superiors and then have some interagency discussions between ATF and DEA to say, hey, guys, what are you doing here? Giving guns to people that we're trying to stop from smuggling drugs into the United States is not a good idea.
The OIG report will answer the questions about what our folks knew. The OIG was given the unilateral authority to investigate.
Well, we will welcome that. I want to, in my last minute here, I want to get in another area of interest. What assistance does the DEA give to state and local law enforcement to combat synthetic drugs?
Thank you for that question, since synthetic drugs is a new, emerging, very troubling problem. I personally have been working with the chiefs and sheriffs, both of the National Sheriff's Association, but also of the IACP. They're the ones that first brought it to my attention that synthetics was a problem. And so we have given them considerable assistance, both in training classes. We've also offered our chemists.
What additional tools do you need that would make the DEA better able to combat synthetic drug abuse?
Actually, this committee just helped, and that was the scheduling of so many of those chemicals. That was number one. Number two, you have given us, the support, our funding, our agent workforce. That has allowed us to teach our agent workforce about this new and emerging trend. It's also allowed us to teach our state and local counterparts about the emerging trend. And we've been able to expand our investigations now internationally to go after the sources of supply that are actually supplying the chemicals, showing up in our neighborhoods, and then eventually being sold as spice and K2.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr.
Gentleman's
Chairman.
time has expired. The gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is it Lienhart?
It's Lenhart.
Lenhart.
Think of the O being silent.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Lienhart. What's your budget?
Well, currently,
Approximately.
$2 million.
$2 million?
$2 billion.
Yeah.
Is
So about $2 billion.
salary and expenses, and then we have additional with a fee account for our diversion program. So total budget is
It's over $2 billion. Do
yes.
you get any confiscation money? Do you get any money from confiscations?
I'm sorry?
Do you get any money from confiscations of properties?
You're talking about asset forfeiture.
Yes.
There is money that the Department of Justice gives us from the asset forfeiture.
How much money do you
fund.
get from that?
I would have to.
Do you have any idea at all?
If you give me a moment, I could.
I'd rather not
probably-
take the time for you to research your files. You don't know. Maybe one of your staff members can give it to you.
I can.
Let me ask you this: do you have what is your number one drug you're fighting? What's your priority?
Well, our priority right now is pharmaceutical drugs.
All right, and what's your second priority?
We don't prioritize specific drugs because the organizations that we are going after are polydrug.
So you're not going after the drugs for the harm they do. You're going after the drugs because of the effect it has on these organizations, and you're going after the organizations. Is that right?
We're going after the organizations that are having the most impact on our communities,
Right.
supplying the most drugs and the most violence.
Right. So you're going after the. So if the fact that meth or crack or heroin is causing the most damage to individuals, if that's not the number one choice of the crime syndicate, it's not your number one choice. Your number one choice is the crime syndicate, not the fact that heroin and meth and crack are destroying people's lives?
No, not correct. The organizations now have their polydrug. So for instance, the Colombian cartels, which are a priority,
Right, they have all those drugs, right?
are the primary source for methamphetamine, cocaine, and a good amount of the heroin on the streets.
Right.
They're a priority.
So that's your number one priority is going after that cartel.
Our number one priority is going after those that most impact the United States.
And do most
Right
of those
now, it would
cartels
be
emphasize, what are the drugs they emphasize in their arsenal?
the Mexican cartels, polydrug. It's cocaine, meth, heroin, marijuana.
Right, marijuana is fourth. Would you agree that marijuana causes less harm to individuals than meth, crack, cocaine, and heroin?
As a former police officer, as a 32-year DEA agent, I can tell you that I think marijuana is an insidious drug.
That's not the question I asked you, ma'am. Does it cause less damage to the American society and to individuals than meth, crack, cocaine, and heroin? Does it make people have to kill to get their fix?
I can tell you that more teens enter treatment.
Can you answer my question? Answer my question, please.
I'm trying to. It causes harm because it's young people that are using it. If you're talking about the
it's not just young people, but you're trying to answer the question like I'm Jeff Sessions. I'm not Senator Sessions. I'm asking you a question. Does meth, does crack, heroin cause more damage to society and does meth and heroin cause more deaths than marijuana?
All drug trafficking causes deaths. I don't have a breakdown of how many
aspirin,
deaths.
does aspirin cause deaths?
I'm talking about the illegal drugs. I don't have a breakdown for you of how many deaths are caused by cocaine and how many are.
Let me ask you
caused
this.
by
Have you ever
meth.
seen a person who had cancer and used marijuana to help them eat or to alleviate their condition of somebody suffering from terminal cancer?
No, I have not.
And if you had, and I have, and seen that it helps them with their appetite and makes them smile, would you agree that it has some benefit to society for somebody who's dying, maybe a Navy SEAL who spent his life working and defending this country and is emaciated to 120 pounds, and that marijuana is the only thing that makes him eat and makes him smile, according to his 80-year-old mother? Is there not an efficacious situation there?
I think that's between him and his doctor.
Well, if it's between him and his doctor, why does the DEA take a position that medical marijuana is wrong, which you've taken? You've taken the position it's not between him and his doctor. You have a publication, which on page 6 of your publication in 2011 has the most insane and banal paragraph. The legalization movement is not simply a harmless academic exercise. The moral danger of thinking that marijuana
Gentleman's
is...
time has expired. The gentlewoman from California, Ms. Chu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Lenhart, I represent a district in Los Angeles County where 3 years ago a young rising star, an elected official in my district, Bobby Salcedo, was murdered by the Mexican drug cartel when he was simply visiting relatives there. This tragedy is why my colleague, Mr. Poe, and I worked on legislation that would allow U.S. law enforcement to more easily freeze the illicit proceeds of international criminal organizations in U.S. financial institutions in hopes of preserving those assets for future seizure. It corrected the situation where the U.S. could only freeze assets of those engaged in criminal activity once the final decision was being made, and our legislation, which was signed into law, allowed U.S. courts to freeze assets once there was evidence of criminal activity. So what role has this law, the Preserving Foreign Criminal Assets for Forfeiture Act, played in assisting DEA's financial investigations and interdicting foreign criminals' money laundering operations?
First, let me thank you for bringing us that legislation. It has helped already. I'm aware that more than $50 million has been frozen because of that. So we want to thank you for it, and know that with DEA, especially our international investigations that regularly are conducted, it's essential to our efforts that we have a way to freeze those assets in the middle of an investigation and during an investigation. We must be able to freeze the money for these foreign countries, and this has allowed us to do it.
Thank you for that. I wanted to follow up on your statement that cooperation between the United States and Mexico is at an all-time high, and that in particular the DEA is grateful for the extradition relationship that you have with Mexico, because it's an important tool that ensures criminals are brought to justice in this country. I wanted to know what you mean by the relationship is at an all-time high, and also the extradition of, talked about the extradition of 94 and 93 individuals from Mexico in 2010 and 2011, respectively. I wanted to know also what the status is of those who've been extradited.
Okay. the relationship with Mexico is at an all-time high, and I say that because we now are working investigations jointly. We're able to develop partners in Mexico that we can share intelligence with, and they can actually take action on that, and vice versa. They develop intelligence and are sharing it with us. We have representatives from the Mexican Federal Police, the SSP, and from the PGR that are even sitting in our El Paso Intelligence Center. So that's a true partnership. We, especially working the violators, the cartel heads that are most important to Mexico, working with them, we've doubled the number of high-value targets that they've been able to arrest in Mexico by sharing this intelligence. On the extraditions, a number of these extraditions, the folks have already been prosecuted and are serving sentences in the United States, many significant sentences. The other thing that Mexico has done by extraditing them to us is those that cooperate after being incarcerated are really giving us a clear picture as to how the Mexican cartels are operating. And that has helped us and Mexico, because we share that information, determine the best way to go after those cartels and those traffickers.
How many have been convicted and sentenced?
I can get you those numbers. I don't know. Many have pled guilty. So a good number of them have pled guilty, and many have been convicted.
And how has it impacted the drug trafficking and violence along the border?
Well, especially of the high-value targets, or the heads or lieutenants of the cartels that we've been able to incarcerate. It has helped Mexico because they have been able to take the people that have been able to have the power to corrupt Mexican officials. They now are in jail cells in the United States, no longer able to run their operations. So it has affected the drug supply as well. We have done together. We have done such damage to the cartels that is why you see these drops in availability of cocaine on the streets of the United States, and the price up and the purity down.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to begin by following up, because I don't, on my colleague Mr. Cohen's questions, and I want to try to get a clear answer to make sure the Drug Administration, Enforcement Administration is aware of some of the evidence. Is crack worse for a person than marijuana?
I believe all illegal drugs are bad.
Is methamphetamine worse for somebody's health than marijuana?
I don't think any illegal drug is good.
Is heroin worse for someone's health than marijuana?
Again, all
I mean,
drugs,
either
they're
yes,
illegal
no, or
drugs.
I don't know. I mean, if you don't know, you can look this up. You should know this as the Chief Administrator for the Drug Enforcement Agency. I'm asking you a very straightforward question. Is heroin worse for someone's health than marijuana?
All illegal drugs are bad.
Does this mean you don't know?
Heroin causes an addiction.
Okay.
That causes many problems, and it's very hard to kick.
So does that mean that the health impact of heroin is worse than marijuana? Is that what you're telling me?
I think you're asking a subjective question.
No, it's objective. Just looking at the science, this is your area of expertise. I'm a layperson, but I've read some of the studies. I'm aware of it. I'm just asking you as an expert in the subject area, is heroin worse for someone's health than marijuana?
And I'm answering as a police officer and as a DEA agent that these drugs are illegal because they are dangerous, because they are addictive, because they do hurt a person's health.
So heroin is more addictive than marijuana? Is heroin more addictive than marijuana in your experience?
Generally, the properties of heroin, yes, it's more addictive.
Is methamphetamine more addictive than marijuana?
Well, both are addictive.
Well, is methamphetamine more highly addictive than marijuana?
I think some people become addicted to marijuana, and some people become addicted to methamphetamine.
You mentioned that the top your top priority, I believe you indicated to us, is abuse of prescription drugs. Is one of the main classifications of prescription drugs painkillers that you're concerned about?
That's correct.
And are those painkillers addictive?
Yes, they are. Very addictive.
Are those painkillers more addictive than marijuana?
All illegal drugs are in Schedule 1 are addictive.
Well, again, this is a health-based question, and I know you're obviously you have a law enforcement background, but I'm sure you're also familiar, given your position, with the science of the matter. And I'm asking, you know, again, clearly your agency has established abuse of prescription drugs as the top priority. Is that therefore an indication that prescription drugs are more addictive than marijuana?
All illegal drugs are addictive.
Okay, your agency has established abuse of prescription drugs as its top priority. You've indicated as much to us. Does that mean that abuse of prescription drugs is a greater threat to the public health than marijuana?
Because it's an emerging threat, because people are turning to prescription drugs faster than any other drug, that is why we prioritize it.
Well, in many states, including my home state of Colorado, we have a legalized and regulated regime of medical marijuana, and we have found some great degree of success in combating the abuse of prescription drugs by making sure that patients have access to medical marijuana, which the science indicates, and I would certainly encourage you to look at the science, is less addictive and less harmful to human health than some of the narcotic prescription drugs that are abused, and also when they're used on label, they can be very harmful to health as well. Would your agency consider supporting medical marijuana provisions when that can be used in pursuit of your top priority, which is reducing abuse of prescription drugs? If it can be documented that the use of medical marijuana helps reduce the abuse of prescription drugs, is that something you're willing to pursue?
Well, Congress has determined that marijuana is a controlled substance, and DEA is tasked with enforcing
but
federal
you mentioned
law.
priorities, though, and you said top priority, reducing abuse of prescription drugs. One tactic to do that would be use of medical marijuana, and I wanted to make sure, again, top priority. In pursuit of your top priority, are you willing to look at the use of medical marijuana as a way of reducing abuse of prescription drugs?
We will look at any options for reducing drug addiction.
The time of the gentleman has expired. Gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Thank the chairman and the ranking member, Administrator Lienhardt. Thank you for your appearance here today. And having been in Phoenix a couple of weeks ago, let me express my appreciation for the service of the Drug Enforcement Agency officers, their professionalism, and as well the work that is done in Houston, Texas, where we are the center point, if you will, for a number of issues dealing with gun trafficking and as well the confluence, if you will, of money, drugs, and guns. And so we're well aware of the importance of collaboration. I'm going to ask a series of quick questions and appreciate helping me get as much on the record as I possibly can. What is the importance of collaboration between the major federal law enforcement? I use as examples FBI, DA, ATF, and others, along with those that I represent on Homeland Security. What's the importance of that?
Well, ma'am, let me start by saying that state and local participation has been DEA's bread and butter for the 39 years we've been an agency. And you combine that partnership with the partnerships that we've developed with other federal agencies. I don't think there's anything stronger, anything more effective at attacking violent crime, attacking drug trafficking, than having task forces. To answer that, especially in the Houston.
So my question is the collaboration strong, positive, continuing, and do the administrators of the respective agencies encourage that collaboration?
Yes, we are probably collaborating now more than
Great.
ever before.
Let me move to Fast and Furious for a very brief question. Has there been a thorough investigation of DEA's contact or involvement by the OIG?
Yes, we made all of our employees in the Phoenix Field Division.
So
and
any questions regarding supervisor directions to say don't say anything, all of that's been investigated, is that correct?
it's being investigated.
Being
yes.
investigated, and all documents will be able to be accessed, or the final report will be able to be accessed on that issue.
Yes, we are all awaiting the OIG finalizing the investigation and the report.
And would you be able to submit that to this committee once it is finalized?
Yes, I would have to defer to the Inspector General, but usually the OIG reports are made public.
Let me move forward, and as I said, quick questions. What is the extent of drug trafficking on tribal land? Can I just get brief answers, because I have a series here?
Yes. There's a serious substance abuse problem on tribal land, especially in the last 5 years with prescription drugs. Their big problem used to be alcohol and methamphetamine, but more recently...
So what are we doing? The DEA has a focus on that? I want to know that we have a problem, and I believe it is, and do we have a focus in some of your...
Absolutely. We have established very good relationships with the other law enforcement agencies, both the FBI and Bureau of Indian Affairs and other tribal law enforcement, and have done joint investigations. We depend on them to tell us, you know, who are the traffickers, who are those most impacting the supply on Indian lands, and then jointly work with them, sharing intelligence, and we've had many successes
Right.
on those lands.
Right. Let me ask you, there have been many requests by members. How is the Ryan Republican budget, the budget that would cut resources, how devastating would that be? And let me follow up so you can answer these questions. I'm very concerned about bath salts. I know we talked about synthetic, but focused on bath salts, and particularly the impact that it just had in Houston, Texas. A story I refer you to, KHOU Channel 11, specifically talked about a heinous incident with bath salts and a individual, David Peterson's, who died on a Galveston street. He was found disoriented and in extreme physical deterioration. And then I'd appreciate your comment about DEA officers and physician officers and pain pills, and whether or not the response is excessive, whether you think we're being fair to doctors on those investigations.
Do you have all points of that multifaceted question?
The last question I had a hard time hearing.
The efforts with DEA, thank you, Mr. Chairman, the efforts with DEA officers dealing with physicians and pain pills, there's been a sort of a surge of closing physician offices, arresting them. I'm wondering, are we being excessive? Are we being careful? Because you're literally shutting down professionals who may be legitimately issuing this.
Okay. Witness will answer.
Okay. I'll start with the, you asked about the budget.
Yes.
You know, these are austere budget times, and we will work within what money is given to us, and we will prioritize accordingly. As to the synthetic drugs, and I'm glad you bring that up, an emerging problem that concerns us. This committee has just helped give us the biggest tool we can, and that's controlling some of those chemicals, those substances. In your area, for instance, our agents have opened a number of investigations, both on bath salts and on K2 and spice, and they've been pretty successful in assisting state and local officers on those types of investigations as well. Your third question about, you know, physicians and pill mills and pain clinics. Houston is very troubling because they have a pill mill problem, and it's not like in Florida with oxycodone, it is hydrocodone that is the problem there. And we've got many investigations, successful investigations, and we have arrested and prosecuted some very egregious doctors. And let me say that the doctors that are affiliated in operating these pill mills and working within these pill mills, there is no, they're not practicing medicine, they're not giving examinations to patients. These pill mills are just open for pill distribution. And those are the physicians, those are the clinics that we have targeted using our intelligence, using undercover investigations, and we've been very successful in the Houston area.
Mr. Chairman.
Time of the gentlewoman has expired.
Mr. Chairman, let me thank you for your courtesies. Could I put a question on the record to be answered in writing, please?
Yes, you can, and that will be taken care of with the UCs that I'm about ready to propound. Thank you, Ms. Lenhart, for coming. We look forward to seeing you come back here. You might look forward to seeing us again, might not do that. But thank you for your testimony today. I think it's been helpful to all of the members. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit to the chair additional written questions for the witnesses, which we will forward and ask the witness to respond as promptly as they can so that their answers may be made a part of the record. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional materials for inclusion into the record. And with that, again, I thank Ms. Lenhart, and without objection, this hearing is adjourned.